So, Brad, big news today. We are recording basically on my birthday, Brad. It's my birthday, and I got to tell you, I came up with an interesting thought that I want to talk to you about cartooning, which is that I think in what I only can describe as the most positive way of looking at it, I think as I get older, I'm realizing that I don't want to retire from cartooning.
Yeah.
That I don't have in my, it's sort of in the things that I fantasize about for the future. I don't have some golden future ahead of me that I'm like, once I get 75, then I'm retiring from comics, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, do you remember we talked about this 100 years ago on Webcomics Weekly, where I think about this often, where we all talked about how our goal was to die at our drawing desk. Right?
Yeah.
And since then I've backed off a little bit. I don't think I necessarily want to die at my drawing desk. I've got a few other ways that maybe I'd like to go, but at the same time, I also don't necessarily think that I'm number one. I don't know that I'm going to be able to, or necessarily that I want to retire at some point. For the simple fact that this is something that it isn't a sport. It isn't like at some point our bodies aren't going to be able to do it.
Right.
This is something that I have noticed in myself that I've gotten better every year that I've done it. And I don't know that I'm going to be willing to stop at 65 or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that go into it. But so I'm turning 48 now, which I think we can all agree is the oldest that a human being can get. That's
yes.
There's no age older than 48. That is so old.
Believe me, there was a time I thought that too. I'm jealous that I thought that you were further along than that. I'm actually jealous that you're only 48. It's going to be a couple of years that I can really get after you about being 50.
50 is going to hit me hard. I think I'm going to have to take a trip to Mexico with my wife just to salve the wound, basically. Isn't that
That's what it took for me.
That's what I was joking about.
I told my wife I don't mind turning 50, but I don't want to be here for it.
But at 48, like one of the interesting things about the birthday this year was I'm not a big birthday person. Like I don't care if I have gifts. I don't care if I have and this is not in any way bragging. It's more of a sense of contentment. I have a charmed life. I don't need a special day about me. You know what I mean? I like the day-to-day life that I live with cartooning and stuff like that. So, so I'm not a big birthday person, but I was thinking this birthday that not in a financial sense, but in a happiness and contentment sense, everyone that's older in my life that retired, they lose a little oomph in their life after they retire. Something, a tiny little spark goes out that is hard to recapture. You know what I mean?
And they start to get a little weird too.
It starts to get a little weird.
All of a sudden, they got too much time on their hands.
Yeah.
And they've kind of got nothing to do, and that's why, like, I always joke. My dad still coaches girls bowling, and it's like, well, what an odd sentence to say. My dad coaches girls bowling for high school, but. And he does other things too. He golfs and stuff. But that girls' bowling league, especially during the long Michigan winters, keeps that guy completely focused. In fact, it's the biggest thing that led towards him learning how to email and learning how to use the internet. And YouTube and stuff like this, because he's always looking for bowling videos to show technique to his girls and stuff. And he's emailing with other coaches. He's very, very sharp I don't want to say sharp for his age, because that sounds like a backhanded compliment.
Right.
But in his retirement, he's remained very, very sharp. Partially because he's got this thing to do.
Yeah. And I don't think it's an accident that Schultz, rest his soul, passed away like the day after his last Sunday ran. You talked to Jeannie about it, and she's convinced that it was like it's not an accident that happened.
Yeah.
But he went basically as far as he could, I think, physically draw,
right,
and then called it. But I really, what we do is so non-labor intensive that provided my hand and arm can still kind of function, I think I would like to draw right up until the end. I think it's a wonderful outlet, and I think it's a benefit to my overall life to maintain that creative aspect. Anyway, I don't know that that's a happy topic to start the show with, but I thought, like, how lovely to have something that you want to do until your final days, which is cartooning.
No, I agree 100%. I agree. And I think it's going to be really interesting to check in on a Dave Kellett, a older, wiser, seasoned Dave Kellett in his 70s, seeing what kind of jokes come out of that mind, what kind of storytelling comes out, because I think it's going to be an interesting process to compare young Sheldon comics to older Sheldon comics.
I'm laughing at that because every once in a while, someone will send you or I some kind of isolated clip from Webcomics Weekly or the Blank Label Comics podcast from 20 years ago or whatever.
Yeah.
And we sound so young, but also it's funny to look back at the Dave or the Brad from back then and what their thoughts on cartooning were. Wouldn't it be funny if 77-year-old Brad is like, fuck this noise, I'm lying down. No, I'm not cartooning anymore. Let me rest. I'm old. For God's sakes.
More.
What did 50 Brad? Well, why was he trying to get me to draw till I died? No, I want to watch my shows.
Yeah, believe me, there have been days like that just recently.
And on that note, I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to ComicLab, the show about making comics
and making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the cartoonist of Evil Inc.
And I'm his pal Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of the documentary Stripped.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. And just a reminder that this show is going out live right now to our ComicLab Live Gab friends over at patreon.com/ComicLab. You can join us and watch the show live streaming every week at the $10 level on Patreon. And every show is archived. So if you missed the live taping, you can watch the video recorded archive on the old archives there. And Brad, we got to give a shout out to our sponsors this week. Who is it, my friend?
Oh, it's as always, it's our good friends down at Wacom. That's WACOM.com, the makers of the powerful professional portable Wacom One.
Well, you said down at Wacom. I think they're technically up at Wacom. Aren't they based in Seattle? I toured their facilities once, which were lovely, by the way.
You're absolutely right.
It was either Seattle or Portland. It was some northwestern city. I'm thinking it was Seattle. Yes, it was Seattle. Yes. No, wait, was it Portland? Oh, God, now I don't remember. Oh, Wacom, I'm so sorry. You have beautiful offices regardless.
Wherever you are.
What I will say is it was a beautiful office, and they were very kind and generous, very nice, and in their welcome. I'm thinking it was Portland. It was Portland. I had a stroke. Wow. Oh, my God. So, Brad, I'm retiring from comics. That's what this announcement is.
I don't think you should retire from comics, but I do think maybe retiring from sponsorship plugs might be for the best.
Well, let me give you an honest thing about Wacom, because I was, as you remember, I was laid up a few weeks ago because I had really, really badly tweaked my ankle, and Wacom was there. The Wacom One was there to save the day for me. And Brad was not too well over Christmas break, and the Wacom One was there for him.
Yeah.
The portability is key.
I was so happy that because there was a couple of days that I just couldn't make it into the studio, and I was so happy that I had this Wacom One sitting right here in the house that I could fire up when I was feeling a little bit better to sit up, and which sounds much worse than it was. But I was so happy that I had this here so I didn't fall behind, so I could still get a little bit of those creative thoughts down. I'm telling you, the Wacom One is a lifesaver as your main unit or as a satellite unit. You need one in your life. If you're doing this professionally or pro-am, it's the best gift you can give for yourself.
And I got to tell you, there is no better phrase than Brad describing something. If Brad ever describes you as that you're his main unit, boy, that's a great thing. I wish I was Brad's main unit.
That's right. That was actually part of my wedding vows.
So we give a shout out and a thank you to our friends Wacom at WACOM.com, the makers of the Wacom One. And Bradley, we got kind of a big start for the show today because we're going to do predictions for 2022. And Brad, jump us in. What is Brad Geiger's big predictions for 2022?
So I've got a number of things that I'm looking to happen in 2022. And the first prediction I've already shared with you, and I've already blown it. So I'll get this one out of the way right off the bat. With each week that goes by, I'm still baffled. I would have predicted that Kickstarter would have backed off of its blockchain decision by now. We talked about that last show.
Yep.
So I'll just say right out in front, that's a prediction that I would have blown. Here's another prediction that I do have. However, I do predict that in the first quarter of 2022, Patreon is going to come out with a Kickstarter clone and try to snap up some of that business.
Really? You really think that they're going to do? I highly disagree with you on that, but you are strongly doubling down on that thought, huh?
If they don't, they're crazy. I mean, this is the time to have that. And quite frankly, nobody's in a better position to do it than Patreon. They've already got the trust. They've already got the user base. They've got to understand that. And don't forget, Dave, they had that venture capital money that that you're always kind of worried in the back of your head.
I am worried about that. Yeah.
They've got to come through with that. What a wonderful pivot to their brand. Let's face it, their big attempt so far has been merchandise. What do they call it? Something for merchandise. Merch. Whatever
merch for members, I think they call it. Or
merch
something.
for members. Horrible.
Yeah.
Every time you do the math on it, you're like, oh my God, this is the worst.
You get a nickel, your readers pay $48, and Patreon gets 32 of it. Yeah, exactly.
So their big push has never really taken, and for good reason. It isn't very good. And they've got to know this. If I sit here and know this, they got to know that. This is an opportunity. It's a golden opportunity. Right, it's a moment in time that Kickstarter, by the way, could survive all of this and come out fine. But if Patreon struck while the iron is hot, they could take such a chunk out of their user base, and they could build this whole new thing. And then all they've got to do is run it well. And boom, they've got their pivot, and they make that venture capital money happy.
Well, while I agree with you that I could see that has high potential payoff in terms of the venture capital pay, the return on investment on that. The thing you said that at the end that was almost dismissive was, and if they run it well, that's where I get nervous, because it's very hard to do what they do, i.e. run Patreon on a day-to-day basis. That's harder than people think. There's a lot of moving parts to that in terms of regulatory, compliance, in terms of technological updates, in terms of user base. All of that is tricky stuff. And it's not like they can just go, well, now we're doing projects as well. So projects by Patreon is our new, and like, it's not as easy. That's why I think they might not do it, because even though Kickstarter's a little wounded right here, there's still the 800-pound gorilla, and it's a big swing to suddenly announce projects by Patreon or whatever they're going to call it.
By the way, I love projects by Patreon. I think they should use that. But the only thing I'm going to say is that if they were making this up out of whole cloth, like they had to do with merch for membership, they had to create that out of nothing. Then it would be difficult. But in this case, all they've got to do is take a look. Hey, how did Kickstarter solve this problem? Okay, we'll do that. How did they do this? We'll do that. All they've got to do is literally copy and paste all of the things that Kickstarter did and bring it in. It's not like this is uncharted territory. This is very much charted territory.
So listen, I think it's a smart prediction, because I do think, like you, that Patreon is constantly trying to look at how to expand their return on investment for their investors. And I am still nervous that those investors are at some point going to clamp down on Patreon, and we're all going to pay the price for it. But I'm not sure that Patreon themselves is ready in the midst of the pandemic to make a big swing like this. I don't know if they have enough people in the office where they can brainstorm. Like, it's not something you launch over Zoom. You know what I mean?
Right.
I don't know if that makes sense. Like, it's trickier to do certain big swings when everyone's out of the office. But I do think that's an interesting thought, and it's something to keep our eye on for 2022, which is Kickstarter stumble and the possibility that someone else could either start to build up their own existing platform like Indiegogo, or that Patreon could take a swing at it as well.
Yeah. So number 2 prediction is right now, it seems like everywhere you look, it's cryptocurrency and NFTs. And it's a big conversation. Yes. I'm going to predict that that in 2022, you're going to see cryptocurrencies recede a little bit. Particularly NFTs. I think you're going to see the bubble burst on those. We've talked about NFTs. I'm not particularly very bullish on them. I don't think there's a there. Mainly, and I've said this before, there's no economic scarcity. It doesn't comply with the basic laws of supply and demand. You cannot convince me that somebody's willing to pay for a receipt of a JPEG.
Oh wait, you're talking NFTs, not crypto. I'm sorry.
I think that the two are very much connected.
Sure.
I think NFTs were kind of built to get people to launch a cryptocurrency account and get used to using cryptocurrency. Yeah. And by the way, it's very interesting because I've been talking about this with my kids. Did you know there's one thing that almost always happens with these NFTs? You'll get a headline that says this NFT sold for $10,000, and you see a piece of art that is absolutely horrible. Right? It's always crappy art. And then you get your nephew, in my case, writing me and saying, hey, if that thing made $10,000, it's so bad. Could you imagine what you could do if you put an NFT up? And I'm like, that's exactly what they want you to say.
Yep.
Right. That's why it's always terrible art that is making these big headlines. Yeah. I think, this is my opinion, I think it's all manufactured. And I think the reason that it's always terrible art is to make people like you and me say, well, if that made $10,000, then mine is going to make $20,000.
Right. You know how you and I always talk about how there are less professional cartoonists in the United States than there are professional NBA players. Yeah. There's actually a surprisingly small number of professional cartoonists in the US, right? What's interesting about NFTs is there's actually a surprisingly small number of owned NFTs right now in existence. The number that I saw thrown around was something like 400,000, but there's been 5.3 million units of PlayStation 5, which is something that is known to be scarce, quote unquote, right? It's been hard to manufacture. So that's the niche product is 5.3 million of the PlayStation 5, and yet 400,000 NFTs. So what I'm getting at is it's a lot of media bluster that I don't think has yet to have any impact, because I think, like Brad, I think it's largely a shell game, and we have largely been manufactured to believe that these have value, that there's a market for them, that things are moving and shaking, when I think, frankly, it's a lot of shells being moved around of like, oh yeah, it's Bob paying a sock puppet account of Bob for his NFT of Bob's art that Bob then can sell to also another sock puppet of Bob's account. You know, I don't know. It just feels very manufactured to me. That's my opinion on it.
I tend to agree with you. And what my prediction is, I think you're going to see cryptocurrency recede a little bit. I don't think it's ever going to go away. I don't believe.
Wait, you're saying cryptocurrency again? I don't think cryptocurrency is going away.
They're both connected. But you're going to see
NFT is much more dodgy than.
Yeah. You're going to see the NFT bubble burst. And I'm also going to say, along with that, you're going to see cryptocurrency receding, because I think eventually, as government agencies get involved in, checking out cryptocurrency, that's going to recede. I don't think it's ever going to go away, because I don't believe technology ever goes away. Yeah. I think it always mutates, it evolves, it gets used in different purposes and different solutions. I don't think it's going to go away, but I think we're going to, by the end of 2022, my prediction is NFTs, you're not going to hear a lot of talk about at all, and cryptocurrency is going to recede significantly.
Yeah, my other thing with crypto is that people always underestimate the emotional and psychological importance of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the FDIC. Yeah, and there's a reason why after 1930, and again in what was it, when the run on the 90s, when my own bank, Washington Mutual, shit the bed, and I was like, oh, thank God for the FDIC. Yes, like there's going to come a moment in crypto where people go, oh shit, I have $100,000 in crypto, and it's all in trouble. I wish I had something like the FDIC. And so anyway, well,
yeah, it's already happened.
Old guys talk about crypto is what this is.
It's already happened. You already see on Twitter people who say, "Hey, my account got hacked and I lost, X thousands of dollars worth of NFTs, and there's no way of getting it back." Right. There's no one they can turn to. There's no agency. It's just, hey, you got hacked and now it's gone.
Right. Or even when that one registry, what was it? I'm going to misremember the facts, but like it was Mt. Gox or something that had a duplicate registry that then messed up the works for a couple of years there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, things can go wrong. And there's going to come a crisis moment where people wished that cryptocurrency had something like the FDIC. So in the meantime, I'll be keeping my money in a bag. Thank you very much.
Take a little bit of a cautious approach to this.
I don't want 1930 all over again. So I'm going to jump in with one of my predictions for 2022. So I want to talk about how we've talked about this before, but do keep your eye towards the end of 2022 about how things go with Substack, because it's going to be fascinating to watch those people that stepped away from DC or Marvel, and if that money, that guaranteed money that dries up from Substack, which we all heard through the grapevine was sometimes in the six figures, if that check gets pulled back in the sense of like, well, we guaranteed you a year, now you're on your own, watch how quietly people tiptoe back to Random House, Scholastic, DC, Marvel, and a new crop comes into Substack. Guys, I'm going to Substack because here's what's going to happen. Substack is going to try to recruit a whole new crowd using a whole new group of artists. And so if you see Brad or I suddenly go, we're going to Substack, it's because someone wrote us a $200,000 check and we're going to take it for a year. But what's going to happen is you're not going to see big announcements. You're just going to quietly see little projects being announced like, oh yeah, I'm doing my next book with DC again. I'm so excited to rejoin my old pals. And it's like, okay, no shit, because you didn't get a $100,000 check from Substack this year, don't you think?
Yeah, no, in fact, that was my last prediction as well.
Was it?
Oh,
I'm so sorry. Yeah, I stepped on your toes.
It works out perfectly, because what I was going to say under this was that, remember we said when we talked about Substack that you had to wait for 366 days. Right? A year and a day, and then you could judge it. Well, day 366 is coming up quick, and we're going to see exactly what you said. Whether this was a good experiment or a bad, these people that took the advance are now going to have to deal with stuff that you and I, Dave, have been dealing with for several years now when we converted to a crowdfunding / Patreon driven business model, and that was churn. Now, what are you going to do?
Churn. I like the way you said that. Churn. Churn. Sorry.
And there's not a Patreon creator that doesn't know what I'm talking about. It's that first of the month Patreon dip when a whole bunch of people cancel their pledge because listen, you shouldn't expect a Patreon backer to back for years and years and years. They've got their own finances that they've got to be in control of. Right. And so first of the month, people dip out. Then you got to kind of bring some more people in. You're always dealing with that in and out of crowdfunding. And now these people who, let's face it, a lot of these people that we're talking about have never necessarily been in charge of their own business, right? They've always been working for publishers. Now they've got to start to solve these problems that you and I have been solving for years. How do I bring those people back in after they went out? How do I deal with the churn? How do I position myself? There's a lot of questions they got to be asking themselves that they've never asked themselves before.
And as Brad and I always say, they being creative people, that's one of the best muscles you can have to jump into business. But so there will be people that figure it out quickly. You throw them in the pool, they learn how to swim immediately. There's other people that go straight to the bottom. And so it's going to be interesting towards the end of this year to see who's like, well, I gave Substack a try, but it's back to DC for me, that kind of thing. So it's, I'm with Brad on this. I think that you're going to see that some people go, well, I'm not good at that. I don't know how to wear that hat. Right. But you know what? Can I talk about that for a second, Brad? And this is jumping gears from talking about predictions, but I'm currently doing fulfillment for my Kickstarter, right? And I'm in the midst of, and last night I had some Willie Nelson playing, and I'm fulfilling packages, right? And and it occurred to me, one of the things that I actively love about being a web cartoonist is that I basically get to live different lives. Yeah. And I'll tell you what I mean. In this moment where I'm doing a bunch of fulfillment, like I have to send out, God knows how many packages. I'm basically living the life of someone who owns a small e-commerce company. And look at me, and I'm shipping out all my soaps and candles or whatever it is. So what I'm getting at is I get to kind of walk different paths while being a cartoonist. You know what I mean? And it's kind of like you and I were talking about a board game that I want to design for Drive. That's living a different life for a brief window. Yep. And when you own and control your own business, you get to do stuff like that. And there's kind of a joy in being able to wear those different hats. So rather than look at it like a chore, it's kind of fun from time to time to be like, no, this is fun. I get to pretend that I'm a small business owner and I get to do all this fulfillment and that kind of stuff. It's neat. I don't know. It's neat.
I kind of like Kickstarter fulfillment days because it's a very different type of brain matter. It's a very different type of day that I go through. I kind of like the physicality of it.
Yes, it is very physical. Yes.
Yeah, I like the packaging. Like I mean, and for me, this is a tangent on a tangent. But when I was working my way through college, I would come home and I would work in the factory that my dad worked at. It was a tool and die shop in Michigan. And what I would work is shipping and receiving. And I just spend all day putting bushings and little parts into boxes and shipping them all over. Yeah. And it was kind of meditative. It was meditative. It was meditative. I said it right. Meditative? It can't be meditative. I was able to meditate. But now when I do fulfillment days for like a Kickstarter or something, it's kind of like I get back in touch with that. And I like planning out my box. I like making sure that it's taped right, making sure that the seams, everything about it appeals to my obsessive nature. And I love doing it. And then, but if I did it all the time, every day, it would get ridiculous. But I get a little bit of it, and then I go back to doing something else. You're right. This life that we lead lets us be different people for little spans of time on end. And if you learn to enjoy that, then you're getting the most out of it.
Yeah. So with apologies for distracting the topic, I think there is a joy to being able to wear different hats for little windows of time as a web cartoonist. So anyway, back to predictions for 2022. I think we will see in summer and in fall of 2022 a very hesitating, tentative reopening of Comic-Cons in the US and Canada, is my opinion. But here is my bigger prediction for probably the next 2 years. You're going to see a lingering hesitancy for a noticeable percentage of the population to not go to, and that's both cartoonists and the crowd itself, to not go to conventions. So I even though I currently am signed up for San Diego Comic-Con, I'm going to have a big hesitancy recommendation for comic conventions, not necessarily for disease, but because the money made from conventions, I'm pretty strongly going to say my prediction is it's not going to be great for the next 2 years or so.
I think you're right.
Because of hesitancy amongst the wider population. Brad, what are your thoughts on that?
No, I agree 110% on that. And that's probably going to mean that a lot of us are going to be doing a lot more projects to make up for that kind of thing. And it's going to be very interesting to see how we pull. By the way, this is my last quote unquote prediction, and it's not a prediction. I honestly don't know how we're going to come out on the other side of the paper shortages, the printing snarls, and the shipping. That's a big question mark for 2022. And it's going to become significant for people like you and me, because as we stop doing things like comic conventions, you're going to be looking for a couple of other projects to crowdfund and make up for that revenue. And that means that we're going to be very much affected by how all of those shortages shake out. And I don't think we're on the other side of it yet.
No. And that will tie in with another prediction of mine, which is the continued growth of the user base of Patreon. And I think, frankly, more artists are going to be jumping on Patreon. Yeah. And not in an exponential curve kind of way. I think in a slow and steady, graphing. But I think more and more artists are going to realize that their traditional streams, like conventions or like printing or this or that, whatever their individual industries traditionally had, they're going to say, no, you know what? Digital distribution, digital sharing of my art is the best way. And one of the best ways to supplement that right now is Patreon. So you're going to see that continue to grow at a slow and steady pace.
Absolutely. So those are our predictions for 2022. Will they come true? You're gonna have to keep listening to this podcast, because as we've already proven, a lot of times, like my prediction on Kickstarter was wrong right out of the gate. But the one thing that you can know for sure is that we're going to have a lot of fun talking about all of these things and more as the year goes on.
Well, one quick thought. Did we have predictions for 2021? I would love to go back and listen to that because it's going to be like, well, see you later, COVID. It's gone for you now that we've got vaccines. Oh, it's all bright and beautiful.
Now that you mention it, maybe we're going to have to do a 2021 prediction review show. Yeah, just because I think we did do a prediction show. We'll have to see how close we came.
I'll tell you what I don't want to review, 2021. To hell with it. I want to I want to get past it. I want to go on to a brighter day in 2022.
It's got to get better soon.
I know. Oh my goodness. Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics. So, Brad, a mid-show update for everybody. We're coming up into spring of 2022. And spring, in the near future, Bradley, it's going to be 25 years of Sheldon online.
Holy moly.
I realize
5 years is a milestone.
We're not there yet. It's going to actually be 2023 is the 25th year. But it made me realize 25 years, not a short amount of time to be doing Sheldon, considering that the length of Bloom County, the length of Calvin and Hobbes, the length of Far Side, they all gave up the ghost around the 10 or 15 year point.
Yeah.
And we're still plugging away, Brad, into the 20s. And part of that is the benefit of being able to set our own schedules, the benefit of being able to be flexible as web cartoonists in a way that syndicated cartoonists were never allowed to be. They had to put out content 7 days a week, 365 days a year, no vacations. Until Doonesbury and Bill Watterson made that so. And so I think that had a bigger potential for burnout than we can do.
Because you could only be a Doonesbury or a Calvin and Hobbes creator to take a vacation. All those people doing like Brian Bassett or the Marmaduke, they didn't take any vacations, and I don't know that was the best way to get the best work out of people was those situations. My question for you, David, is do you ever think you're going to do one of those big anthology books? Like 25 is one of those numbers that people tend to hit. Would you ever consider doing a retrospective, an anthology of 25 years of Sheldon?
The truth is, I don't know. In an ideal world, I would love to do a best of book. Because I'm at an interesting point career-wise. Might as well talk about this for a second. In this last Drive Kickstarter campaign, I basically sold out of my last Sheldon collection. So books 1 through 10. Most of the collections are gone. I have 20 of book 3, 30 of book 4. That doesn't matter what the numbers are, but very few numbers left of books that used to take up my storage space. And so the question is, do I now put a hat on top of that entire period and do a best of book, which is an interesting question for you, or do I do a huge ass anthology? And the truth is, the Sheldon books have had kind of a diminishing return over the last 5 to 7 years. I'm not saying they're not worth the effort, but there has been a noticeable diminishment of what they can bring in versus what Drive can do. And so I don't know. I turn the question back to you. What do you think I should do?
Ooh, I don't know. It's interesting. Part of me loves that idea of those, like we've seen people do it, like Scott Kurtz has done it. Danielle has done it, where they do these big, heavy black and white books of here's 25 years, here's 50 years of, or 50, I don't think we've hit that yet, but here's this big chunk of work. Right. And part of me likes that idea of having a book with everything, just literally everything. It might not be full color for obvious reasons, but you've got this completionist part of me really loves the idea of having that. On the other hand, you could make a more beautiful book. You could make a more interesting book if you took the best of route. You could go to a color printing. Then you could and also, like for people like you and me, it's like, okay, we've done so many different things now. When you take Sheldon and Drive and things like the anatomy books and all of those other things that you've done, how do you put that all in one book? How do you put Sheldon comics in the same book as a Drive book?
Well, yeah, you don't. I don't think you do.
So you're never going to, my point though is, so you're never going to really have a completionist book because there's no way of completely capturing everything you've done.
Brad, there's no book can contain Dave Kellett.
Well,
I contain multitudes, Brad. There's no, you can't capture me in a book.
Yes,
no.
Yes on all counts. Yes on all counts.
I was joking,
so if you're going to step away from that completionist idea, which might not be a good fit for people like you and me, then you go to the best of and you say, here's the best moments of the last 25 years. I hope you enjoy them. And I think there'd be some legs to that.
So that's an interesting question. Like, I don't know. There is perhaps a continuing long tail sales possibility for a best of book. People, in a way that I think is good, respond well to a best of book because they're like, okay, I'm only getting the gems. So why not buy this one? That kind of thing. However, it's tricky to introduce somebody to a comic with a best of book. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of people that are like, I don't want to jump in on the best in book. I don't know. It's like, would you label it as a best of Sheldon, or you would say 25 years of the best of Sheldon, or
okay, so for me, I would be 25 years of the best of Dave Kellett, and then you bring all of that stuff.
Oh, you would say all of it? What you would say?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, why not? Why not? Okay, so take a look. One of my favorite books that I've got on my bookshelf at the studio is I've got a retrospective of the art of Harvey Kurtzman.
Yeah.
Right now, you take a look at that guy. He kind of was the person that was the creative force behind Mad Magazine, but he also did a whole a bunch of other stuff, and it's all beautiful in its own right. But I like the fact that I see all of these different facets of Harvey Kurtzman in that book. I think it's a great book. Why limit yourself? Why not have, here are some of the best moments from Drive. Here are some of the best anatomy cartoons that I did. But by the way, what an interesting book to page through, because you've got surely maybe a big chunk of it, maybe the lion's share would be Sheldon comics. But there would be so many different ways that you could chop that up. Also, the way you've done with your books, you could have a chapter of just the best Pugs comics, a chapter of the best coffee comics.
True.
There's a lot of different ways that you could organize that. That would make it an interesting look at your career over the last 25 years. Maybe.
I personally feel like I don't get me wrong. I like my career. I think that that's an unsatisfying read of like, here's everything Dave Kellett's done in 25 years. Like, even I kind of don't give a shit about that book in the sense of like, if I don't care, how can I expect other people to care? I think there is an argument for a best of Sheldon book. I do agree with you there. I don't think there's an argument for a best of Dave Kellett book. That's different. Because no one cares about me per se. They either like Sheldon or they like Drive or they like the anatomy books.
I didn't necessarily care a whole lot about Harvey Kurtzman until my in-laws got me that book.
Okay, well,
I mean, I knew him. I knew the word. I knew the man. I knew little bits about him, but I never really cared.
I will say this, though, because we kind of glossed over it. Both Brad and I very quickly got away from the all-inclusive anthology, and we didn't say it, but I think we should speak to this. My history of both people that I know and people that I've talked to that did one, there's not a single person that put out one of those anthologies that said, oh, it was worth all the effort, or either monetarily or emotionally. Do you, Brad? Am I wrong there? Has anyone that we know that has put together one of those anthologies, do they say, "Yep, it was worth the time and the effort. I'm so happy I did it"?
I've never heard Danielle talk about her anthology specifically. I do know that as Scott Kurtz has been, building these books, these anthologies, and he's spoken about this openly on Twitter. Some of his humor did not age well. Right. There's some takes that he had that now he's like, oh, you know what? I'm a different person now than I was when I wrote that joke. I don't know that I necessarily want that as part of it. And then you've got to decide, well, if you're doing an anthology or if you're doing a complete history, is it complete without the warts and all part of it? So that's been, I think, without putting words in his mouth, a painful process as well. No, to your point, Dave, I don't know that I've ever heard anyone necessarily say, boy, this was a great idea.
Well, and also, this is maybe more psychology than people want, but I don't know that I want to wallow is not the right word, but I don't want to wallow in the past. I don't want to swim through 25 years of my work and have to get every file ready from 1999 or 2003. I don't give a shit about past, Dave. I want to do the future stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I don't know that I care about my own past enough to create the all-inclusive everything Dave Kellett's ever produced, because I know that cartoon from 2003 that I did on that Tuesday that I was sick and I didn't want to even cartoon that day, it's not worth the effort to prepare that file to make sure that it's in the book, because it's not that much of a sparkling gem, I don't know.
And and there's so much, like, it's just my own work. I think about like how much, then you got to go into the whole color versus black and white thing.
Yeah.
And how, if you take a comic that was produced for color and now you're presenting it in black and white, how much is getting lost? How much actual, like a lot of stuff, you could take Alex's colors off my comic and it's not the same comic anymore.
Yeah. And also, I know this is the case with you because it's the case with me. Beth will sometimes open up a 10-year-old file that I did in 2012, right? And she'll be like, what the hell did you do? What are these layers and why? And what I'm getting at is, over a 25-year career, there's been some weird ways that I prepped files or that I did. And so in doing an anthology, you have to open up every bad version of every bad file that you've ever created and go, well, I got to make this work as a high-res TIFF for print now.
What am I going to do?
Now what am I going to do? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So so anyway, to put a cap on that, the reason why Brad and I quickly stepped away from that is I think that we both intuit that's not a fun project. And I don't know that even it's financially worth it for all the work that it would take. It would take me a long time to put together 25 years of comics.
Now let's go down the business side of this. Now you've got a huge book.
A huge ass book. Shipping,
it costs
Brad.
a lot to make. It costs a lot to ship. It's a chunk, right? It's going to be several pounds that you're shipping. It's a book that, let's face it, not every one of your readers, followers, fans are going to want.
Right.
Like they might want the best of Drive. They might want the best of Sheldon. Do they want every Sheldon comic ever? That's a niche of your overall audience.
Yeah, a niche of a niche.
It's a percentage of people, from even the people who are really big Dave Kellett fans. They've got to sit there and they're like, am I so much of a Dave Kellett fan? And I'm just going to make my numbers up here that I want to put $100 into a 20-pound book.
Right.
Maybe not. You've created this huge thing that only a very small number of people actually want, which is not a great business plan.
No. And you need a big starting user base to make that work. And as we've talked about in the past, and I have no problem admitting it, I don't have a huge user base. But what I do have is a good way to monetize the user base that I do have, such that I can make a career and have an employee. But I don't have enough of a user base that they want to plunk down $100 on a best of. And now you as a listener might be individually saying, I do, Dave. I'd love to have a best of. Yeah. But let me just tell you that both Brad and I, our business intuition is there's not enough of you, individual, that to make that book worthwhile. So I do think Brad's idea of a best of is good. I don't know, Brad, that I like the best of Dave Kellett for 25 years. And I don't know that I can quantify why I don't like that.
What if there was 4 books? The best of Drive, the best of Sheldon, the best of the rest. 3 books.
No. I immediately go no to that. I don't know. You know what it is? Because for me, the anatomy books stand alone. You either have them or you don't. You don't need to have them incorporated into another book. Drive as a story. It's like sharing one page of The Hobbit and going, the best of J.R.R. Tolkien.
Yeah.
Remember that when he fought the trolls? Right. That was a fun scene.
Here's the best of those tree chapters where he talked about trees for several pages on end.
Here's just Tom Bombadil. All right, keep going.
It's harder to do a best of Drive. You're right. So that brings you right back to the best of Sheldon.
Yeah.
I hate for 25 year. I hate for that milestone to go by without something, though. That's a big milestone. And I mean, just speaking, and part of this is projecting. I passed the 20-year milestone for Evil Inc. And I was like, I should have done something about that. I always feel like I missed the play on that. I didn't take advantage of that, man.
Yeah,
so some of this is projecting that here's your next big milestone. If not a publication, what would you do to mark that? Because let's face it, not a lot of people get to that. Not a lot of people are ever going to get to that. Right. You are a part of that is marketing and branding too. This is an opportunity to say something about yourself as a creator. How do you not let that moment go by?
I don't know. So part of this is me asking you as a friend. I've got a year to figure this out. When I get to 25, how do I market? And maybe I do a slim best of. That's, by slim, I mean 130 pages. What?
You're so, your Catholicism just came out through there. Okay, I'll do a best of, but a slim one. You're so afraid. That was just the tip of publishing. I'll do a best of, but a slim one, because I don't want you to think that a whole lot of my comics are the best. So maybe a pamphlet, maybe 4. Maybe it's okay if I have 4 best.
Oh God, I'm laughing because you called me on the right one on that. Like, yes, I'll do a best of, but in discreet colors. It'll be wrapped in a brown bag. I don't want to be showy about it.
Your Catholicism just came shining through.
Oh God, that's funny. Yeah, I don't want to brag about me. Let's just
Oh,
the number 25 beautiful. Will be in like 4-point font. We'll have it very small.
Oh my God. Yeah, well, there you go. 25 pages for 25 years. You can just have one comic. This was the best comic for the whole year. And if it makes you feel better, 6 of the pages can be blank.
I'll put it out as a 25-page PDF for 25 cents. That's what I'll do. Yeah. Keep it real discreet. Oh, God, that's funny. You really got me on that. So it's interesting. I have a year left to figure out what I'm going to do for 25. Because a part of me, and this is an ongoing thing, is that the return on investment for Sheldon is self-acknowledgingly slowly diminishing. So I don't know if I wrap it up at 25 years. It's one of those questions that I come to every now and again.
Yeah.
Or do I say, hey, it's been a nice 25 years. I'm perfectly happy with the output amount that I'm doing for Sheldon now. I still physically enjoy doing it. I need that outlet of a comic that can allow for any idea on any topic, which Drive does not,
Right.
And to some extent, even Evil Inc. doesn't for you,
right?
Is that you still do single panels from time to time, or a slow runner of a week's worth of jokes in a sort of standalone way, because we find that long story format is not the perfect outlet for any and all types of ideas, which for me Sheldon is. Yeah. So anyway. Too much hemming and hawing on this. It's just fun to say it's coming up for me 25 years. I solicit any ideas from folks on how I discreetly acknowledge that I had 25 years with Sheldon.
Well, as Dave struggles with his ego, boy, you and I have very different problems when it comes to ego. I just realized that. Mine is too much. Mine is like, hey, here's 1,000 Brad Geiger books. Now read them all.
No, don't get me wrong. I like myself very much, and I have no problem saying that I'm very proud of my career. And you've seen me at Comic Cons. Nobody can outsell me in terms of selling my own work.
You're right about that.
There's a there's a process that I have to go through to build myself up to promoting myself. So that's what it is. That's what it is.
Well, as Dave goes through his process, let's go through the process of answering a question from one of our Patreon backers. This one comes in from Adonis. You remember Adonis, don't you?
I do. Adonis, thank you for writing in every time. We love it.
This one comes in from Adonis, who says, I've been working on the writing for my comic and constantly find myself going back to thinking what the character would actually do in certain situations. What techniques do you perform to get to know your characters better? How fleshed out and close to being people are they before you start writing for them? As always, thank you for working on this podcast as well as sharing your passions, even if it does involve a questionable fascination for crows. Thank you, Adonis, for that. So here's what Adonis is doing. He's writing this story, but then he gets hung up because it's like, would the character actually do this?
Okay, so a couple of things to start off with. One, as you're starting a story, I find it very helpful to create a character Bible. And for those not familiar with it, a character Bible can, by the way, it can be literally a half a page in a notebook. It doesn't need to be anything special. Just like where were they born? What were the conditions of their childhood? What's their general outlook on life? If you had to summarize their psychology in 4 or 5 words, what would it be, right? Just so you know their character, you can flip back to that page in the Bible every once in a while and remind yourself of their worldview, their outlook, their psychology, all that sort of stuff. That's stage one. Stage two, I will have to say, for the characters that I've truly loved in a story, something about the way they speak, the way they think, the way they act either rings true or doesn't. And it's hard for me to quantify that in a helpful way for others to say that, oh, Nosh would do this. Nosh is a character of mine. Nosh would do this. Nosh would not do that. I know it almost intuitively at this point, but it's hard to quantify for other people what the limitations are, right?
Right.
And then the third part of that question is, how do I get a character to actually do a thing? Well, if it's a moment in your story where to you, it seems like they would not do this. This is not something they would do, but you need that to happen in the story. Well, here's where your writer toolkit comes in handy, because you've written yourself into a corner. Now you write yourself out of the corner. So if I need my character of Brad Geiger to jump out of a window, but I've written him as a logical, reasonable person who has good self-preservation, obviously, he would not choose to jump out of a window. That's not something Brad Geiger would do. But if I wrote it where, so now knowing that I need the story to have my character of Brad Geiger jump out a window, but knowing that he is a character that would not do that thing, now I've written myself into a corner. The way I write my way out of it is, okay, how do I change the situation such that the parameters of his decision make more sense within the realm of his psychology? So now, okay, now there's a fire behind Brad in the room. He's got to jump out that window, right? Or Brad's kids are in danger outside. He might break his ankle, but he's got to go save his kids. So he jumps out the window, right? You get where I'm going with this, is that you make your character do the thing because external circumstances have gotten to a point where within the rationality of their being, they've made that decision work. Brad, what do you think about that?
Absolutely. And I think, as with many things in the art side of what we do, it's a question of degree. In other words, what Dave says about intuitively knowing who your character is and learning about this through doing things like story Bible exercises and stuff like that, that's very important. On the other hand, the other side of that is not to go so far where you are constantly upsetting your creative process. And let me tell you what I mean by that. I don't ever get into a situation where I'm so worried about, would this character actually do this, that I prevent myself from writing the story I need to read at the end of the day. You know, what story do I want to read at the end of the day? Let me put it. I don't think I'm explaining it well, so I'm gonna try this angle. Great stories were never made by characters making good decisions.
Oh, that's a good angle. That's a good angle. Yes.
Sometimes your character has to make bad decisions, and you've got to come up with good reasons for them to make bad decisions. And you're sitting there saying, like, there's 2 different ways I can read that sentence. Would my character actually do this? On one hand, what Dave just described is absolutely right. My character is a logical person, so I can't have them doing certain things that are irrational because it's not going to make sense. That's perfectly good. Except every now and again, you need a logical person to make an illogical choice for the betterment of the story, and you've got to figure out how to do that. And if you're so wound up with this character would not do that, well, then you're preventing yourself from writing the story that needs to be written. You've got to give your freedom to let your character make bad choices for good reasons, right? You've got to come up with a reason for it to happen. Like Dave said, you light the room on fire, or you make something happen that it's necessary to jump through that window. In all, I want the more time you spend into figuring out who your character is and knowing them, the less time you're going to worry about this. Mm-hmm. But in general, I want you to spend more time worrying about what's the best story, not necessarily what would in other words, if you're coming down between character and story, I want you to write the better story, even if it means writing something that character maybe wouldn't have done.
Right.
Does that make sense? I want the story to be good.
You're saying put primacy on moving the plot forward, making the story interesting, rather than like always being true to the character. Always gotta make it, because to Brad's point, if someone is always making a rational decision, is always doing the right thing, it's a pretty boring story usually, that kind of thing.
And chances are, if you've got a protagonist, they're going to be that kind of person.
Oh my God, the Midwest on you came out so much when you said protagonist. That no A has done as much work as protagonist there. If you get a protagonist, he's going to have a sausage, and he's going to say, "Hey, where's my brats to go with my protagonist?" Oh my goodness, that was amazing. You were speaking so Philadelphia for a minute, and then all of a sudden, okay, so now you're going to want to send your protagonist. Oh God, I don't know why that made me laugh so much. Okay,
it's funny. My Midwest comes out just a word at a time these days.
So let's look at this another way too. Is that if you have a cast of characters, now listen, if you have a single character and they're moving through a story arc, it gets a little trickier. But let's say you get to a plot point or a twist, and you need a certain series of events to happen, and you have 6 characters in the story. Another option you can do is that if you know that character A will not have a satisfying reaction to the situation, well, then bring in character B and let them react to it. You know what I mean? Yeah. Run through the cast of characters in your mind and say, oh, no, B would have a much funnier, more interesting, or more, dramatic interplay with a series of events than A would. So I will use B. That's one of the reasons why Star Trek has a cast of very different characters, because external event comes in. Oh no, it's this weird alien. And now do you have Picard react to it? Do you have Geordi react to it? Do you have Data? Those are all very different reactions. And so you use whatever their character moments would present as the best story plot and go from there. So it's not always Picard taking the lead. Sometimes it's Worf with his emotional, battle reactions, and he's got to react to it. Sometimes it's the logic of Data. And that's what makes Star Trek so fun, is you can bring in different characters to react to the very same event. You can do that in your cartooning.
Absolutely. Just as a quick tangent, are you watching Star Trek Lower Decks on I think it's on the Paramount Plus channel?
I'm not. We'll go ahead and give you
I'm going to tell you, just as a tangent, I think it's in my top 3 Star Trek iterations ever. And that's the original series, Next Generation, and Lower Deck.
Really?
I cannot remember a better Star Trek. Oh, it's chef's kiss wonderful. And it's a comedy, which helps, but it's also really good storyteller, really good character development. I want you to watch it because I want to discuss it with you.
Okay. In large part, I a little bit feel like the newer Star Trek, which one is it? Discovery.
Discovery.
I had such great hopes for it, and I like aspects of it, but I kind of think they lost the thread on what Star Trek is, which is...
Yeah, well, I love the first season. The second season, I watched the first few episodes, and it kind of dragged for me, and I dropped off, and then I need to jump back in because I really enjoyed the first season.
Yeah, it's funny. You'll get 1,000 opinions from different Star Trek people about I don't know if it's Trekkies or Trekkers. What's the accepted term now? But anyway, the final thought that I want to give to Adonis on this question is remember that you can move your story along. Take a page out of Homer with the Odyssey, in that Odysseus might have reacted in a rational, normal way. He was just trying to get home, but Homer kept throwing shit at him, right? And so it's not like Odysseus chose bad islands to land on. They needed food or they needed water. So, they land on this island, weird shit happens, but Odysseus is doing his best. He's reacting rationally, or as much as he can react rationally, but the story moves along because Homer puts him in situations that he has to react like a dipshit sometimes,
Right.
And so you can do that as a creator too, which is you can have a character who is acting rationally, acting normal, but then the economy goes to hell, or his family dies, or her job is lost, or whatever it is, and as a result they're making irrational decisions. To Brad's point, then the story is more interesting because suddenly it's someone at their breaking point. It's someone that's not making the best decisions. That's where stories get interesting.
I'm gonna see if I can put a capper on this by really summing what my thoughts are. There's two mistakes that you could make as a writer.
Okay.
You could write a character that isn't quite true to its character, or you could write a story that isn't a very interesting story. And I think the readers will forgive the first, but they'll never forgive the second.
Oh,
right?
What do you mean?
So,
elaborate on that.
So if you're so wound up with would this character actually do it that you're not writing a good story, then your readers will not forgive that because the story's no good. So in other words, if you write a bland story that's absolutely note perfect true to the character, it's still a bland story, right? You could make that character do something that's a little out of character. And if you write a good story, your readers are going to forgive it. But if you're true to the character, absolutely perfectly true, and write a bland story, the readers are going to say that was a bland story. No one's ever going to read a bland story and say, yeah, but the character was right on. The character never did anything that was out of character for that person.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is err on the side of writing a good story. Allow yourself, if you're going to make a mistake either way, make a mistake that makes the better story.
Agreed. I think that's one of the strongest points that you've made. Yeah, I really do think err on the side of the story, and also establish a world where your characters, hopefully being imperfect people, it's very possible that they could have made a mistake. They could have deviated from who they normally are. We all, every once a while, you find yourself in your own day going, well, that was a dumb thing to do. Why did I do that? It's because we make mistakes. We make bad choices. Your characters do too. So it's okay if they deviate from who they quote unquote are, if you can ascribe it to a mistake or a blip in their decision making. That's also possible. But I think Brad's the strongest point is the one we should go out on, which is err on the side of the story rather than on the side of the character.
Well, speaking of making mistakes and having errors in judgment, you've been listening to ComicLab for another hour, and how you let it get this far, I have no idea. You're going to have to look into your own decision-making for that. But until then, I get to tell you that you've been listening to ComicLab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been my friend Brad Geiger, who over the years has gotten better and better at these outros. What a transition that was. That was smooth as butter. I got to tell you, he is the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
And my good friend, the older, wiser, and downright better in all ways, Dave Kellett, co-director of the comics documentary Stripped, and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
And just a reminder that our sponsor today are the good folks at Wacom at wacom.com, makers of the Wacom One. And the ComicLab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited by our pal Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love ComicLab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and look for the review function on Spotify, where we are making great inroads towards building our community.
Rocketing up the charts is the phrase that the kids use.
Yes. And you may hear your review featured on a future episode.
And ComicLab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/ComicLab. So we'll go ahead and say that twice. Patreon.com/ComicLab.
Hey, Marge, I've got the new all-Catholic version of the Best of Dave Kellett's 25 Years. It's a 6-page fold-out pamphlet, and 3 of the pages are blank. I don't know whether I got the right. Did I get the right book here?
And the other one is just a discrete photo of him kind of smiling, kind of not smiling. He's not trying to make a show of himself.
Yeah, he's actually standing behind a plant. It was run off the church mimeograph machine. I haven't seen a mimeograph in 25 years either. This is amazing. I can still smell that mimeograph smell.
There is one comic presented, but underneath it, there's a bit of a inscription text that says, maybe you'll like it, maybe you won't. No big deal if you don't. You don't have to like it. It's fine if you don't. It's fine.
I always like these director's cut books where they have the cartoonist having commentary, but Dave's commentary is always the same underneath every comic. Sorry.
I did. I did what I could.